All right, we're back. Now, in this search for identity, part of that would be a subset of sexual identity, which is our figuring out our sexual orientation. So this is usually expressed for the first time in adolescence, and I mean expressed, right? It may be something that the person has been thinking about, maybe even acting on in certain ways in their childhood, but where they really start, when all of us really start to have our first sexual kinds of expressions towards another person, typically is going to be in adolescence. So we all start to figure out, well, who am I expressing my sexual desires towards? Who am I fantasizing about? Who do I feel romantically attached to? And sexual orientation is really about all of those things. It's partly about sexual behaviors that you engage in, but it's also about emotional connections that you have. And it's also about, fantasy and who you think about when you're sexually aroused and things like that. So there's a bunch of things that go along, and all of those things tend to be mostly starting to be expressed after puberty. There's certain little bits of behavior that might happen before that, but definitely adolescence is going to be this dividing line between sort of childhood and then the beginning of sexual expression. So let's talk a little bit about the factors that determine our sexual orientation. The first thing is biology, and I'm going to point to animals as evidence for a variety of sexual orientations. A lot of times when people talk about people who are oriented towards their same sex or to a mixture of both sexes, they'll say sort of like, well, it's unnatural to be attracted to somebody of your same sex. And so it's really important when we think about sexual orientation. Of course, animals on average are attracted to the opposite sex within their species, and that's how the species gets, conveyed into the future. But if we see evidence of same-sex sexual orientation in animals, it kind of suggests that it must be at least in part natural. It must be at least in part based on biology. So, for example, in the wild, I almost called them mountain lions, and that is certainly not a mountain lion we're looking at right there. Mountain goats, there we go. Mountain goats, about 8% have been observed to be, of the males, have been observed to be attracted to their same sex. Now, if you think about herd animals, really they have to fight with each other. The males have to fight with each other in order to get access to mate with the females. So it's, there's always this possibility that some of the things that we observe with animals are not necessarily their choice, but it's sort of like where they're left. But when we see that about 8% seem to have paired off and don't compete in the rut to have access to the females, it kind of gives the impression that they might be attracted to their same sex. Same thing with the albatross. Especially when there are not enough males in the population, oftentimes females will pair bond, and they pair bond for life, and they make their nests and they lay their unfertilized eggs and try and hatch them and stuff like that. It appears that they have formed, a same-sex lesbian partnership. In dolphin pods, they will do all sorts of penile things where they like rub on each other and they mount each other, and it's almost like they're trying to I want to say fight with their penises, because they'll rub them together, and it's really a lot of things that they do that look like very much gay behavior between the males. One interpretation is that it's not really about sex, it's about submission and building pod cohesion. So, we have to be super careful about how we're interpreting what we're seeing the animals doing. There are a bunch of different same-sex penguin couples in zoos. Some of them are male-male, some are female-female. I can tell you that one of the most famous ones, there was a children's book written about this gay male pair, actually broke up when one of the members of the pair got attracted to a new female that arrived. So again, you got to be a little bit careful. It's possible that they're attracted to each other not because they're attracted to each other, but because they have the desire to pair bond. And in the absence of appropriate partners, they're picking each other. But now that I said that, I have to tell you, there was a lesbian penguin couple in Canada, and even though they brought in a new male hoping that they would mate, neither of the females would leave each other in order to mate with the male. So, I think we're being pretty careful as we're trying to interpret these animal species. What we found in research is about 450 different species have been shown to display to some degree, some percentage showing same-sex sexual orientation, which implies that there's something biological driving sexual orientation and that it's not something that's unnatural per se, because if animals do it, it's probably natural, right? So let's talk a little bit more about what we do know is associated with determining our sexual orientation. Twin studies are really useful because, as you guys recall, identical twins share 100% of their genes in common, whereas fraternal twins share 50% of their genes in common. So that gives us like a little experiment to look and see whether if the identical twins are more similar on a trait than the fraternal twins, it's probably more heavily influenced by genes than environment, because twins they all share the same environment in the womb. They're all, always going to be the same age as each other. I mean, there's all these factors that are the same environmentally. The one big difference is how many genes they share, right? So this study was looking at genes as a possible factor in determining sexual orientation. So this is actually four different studies and then a combination. So this is what we call a meta-analysis. So they were looking at the X chromosome of brother pairs. So you have identical twins in the black bar, and sorry, I started to report the wrong study for a second. Sorry about that. So in the black bars are the times that the twins shared the same gene on that X allele, and it's actually a specific place on the X. It's the XQ28 allele that they were looking at specifically. And what I was going to describe, it wasn't different twins per se in this study. It was in the pairs of twins. In some cases, both twins reported that they were gay. They were all male, for one thing. So in some pairs, they reported that they were both gay, and in some pairs, one was gay and the other was straight. And what they found is that when they were both gay, they tended to have a shared allele on this XQ28. That's why the black bars are bigger. They were less likely to have a non-shared and both be gay. And that's the white bars. And in 3 of the studies, Hamer, Hu, and Sanders, you see that it's much more likely that they had a shared allele at that position if they were both gay. In the 4th study, Rice, you'll see that there's actually no significant difference in the likelihood of them being shared or not shared. So that was the one outlier, was the Rice study. So in this meta-analysis, they collapsed all 4 studies together and looked at the overall pattern. And what they find is that it's much more likely that when both twins are gay, they tend to share this XQ28 allele. So the hypothesis from this analysis is that this is the position that might determine sexual orientation. If we got a bunch of straight brothers together, we'd probably see that they probably shared this allele also with each other. So having a match on that position made it more likely that you matched on sexual orientation. Here's our monozygotic versus dizygotic twin study that I thought was popping up last time. All right, so now we have some are monozygotic, identical twins, and some are dizygotic. On the left side of this panel in the orangish colored bars, those are boys or males. On the yellow bars on the right part of the panel, those are girls or females. And so we have in the twin pairs, one is gay, and then the other is the one who we're measuring, right? We're asking if they're also gay. So what you're seeing on the left is brothers of gay men, and on the right, you're seeing sisters of lesbian women. And what we want to find out is how often these brothers matched their gay brothers' sexual orientation, how often the sisters matched their lesbian sisters' orientation. So if they were an identical twin, 52% of the time, the brother was also gay. So that basically another way of saying that is that they matched on sexual orientation. 52% of the time, the identical twin boys matched. 48% of the time, the identical twin girls matched, the women matched. If they were fraternals, you'll notice this enormous drop in the matching. So, we know that one of the brothers is gay. Is the fraternal twin also gay? Well, 22% of the time that was true. We know that the sister's a lesbian. Is the one that we're measuring also a lesbian? 16% of the time that was true. And then the final bar for each of them is you have an adopted same-sex sibling. So for the brothers of the gay men, we have, if you are adopted and that's your relationship to the known gay person, what's the probability that you are also gay? It was 11%. Now, in the population, the estimate of gay males is about 6% of the population. It varies, but about 6%. So this 11% is a little bit elevated above, the base in the population. So that's meaningful. It kind of implies there's some amount of environmental factor going in there, but it's half of what you would see with a fraternal twin. So the more genetically similar you are to a person, the more likely you are to share this trait. Whereas for girls, it's about 6%. And in the population for women, it's probably about 3% of the population that is lesbian, like full lesbian, not bisexual. So again, it's an elevated rate with the adopted sisters, but it's not, it's nowhere near what we see with the fraternal twins. So what can we conclude from this? Well, one really super important thing to conclude from this is that the sexual orientation only matched at the maximum roughly 50% of the time, right? So it's not a guarantee that sexual orientation is biological, or we should say not necessarily genetic. Genes are different from other biological factors, right? So it's not a given that if you share 100% of your genes with somebody that you'll share this particular trait. So clearly something else is going on. But the more closely related you are to a person, the more likely you are to share their sexual orientation. So now let's talk about brother studies. This one is a little mind-blowing. So brace yourself to have your mind blown. All right, so what we're seeing here is we have, as it says in the description at the top, there were 302 homosexual men matched with 302 heterosexual men. And so what that means is that they made sure that they matched on every other characteristic that they thought could matter: age, income, other factors besides their sexual orientation. So they're as similar to each other as they can be. They just don't share a sexual orientation. Half of them are gay and half of them are straight. Okay. The black bars in this chart represent the homosexual respondents. And by the way, that's the scientific term for it. So, if that's grating on you as you're listening to this, that's the scientific term. And then the white bars are the heterosexual. Homo means same, heterosexual means other, and so that's why they use it. It's not a pejorative or put down term. Okay, so we've got the black bars, we got the white bars. Notice that it was much more likely for homosexual men to report that they had older brothers or older sisters, and for heterosexual men to report that they have younger brothers or younger sisters. That's an interesting finding, isn't it? So when I teach this class in person, I always like to ask, what do you think could possibly be going on here? Like, why would this be going together? And after we go through a number of incorrect but very creative interpretations, I reveal what the researchers have concluded, which is that when mom is pregnant, her body marshals defenses against the invader that is the fetus. And the more time she's pregnant, the quicker her body can marshal those defenses. And so one hypothesis is that the fetus is under stress in later pregnancies, and that can have an impact on the hormones that the fetus is releasing during fetal development, and that can have an impact on the brain. So let's move on to hormones real quick, and then this will make a little bit more sense. So as we've discussed before, during pregnancy, prenatal hormones ride a roller coaster. If there's a Y chromosome present, there tends to be a burst of testosterone that makes the genitals about 9 weeks after conception. And then there's another burst of testosterone about 20 or 24 weeks after conception, and we think that shapes the brain. So go ahead and watch this video. They'll talk a little bit about what testosterone does, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about how this can have an impact on sexual orientation.